A while ago it came to light that the video game company Blizzard has a very harrowing and dreadful work environment for women, which I'm sure you all know about. And recently it was discovered that the CEO of Blizzard was aware of all the misconduct that has been going on for years in the company, and even being part of it himself. It also seems that he threatened to take the life of one of the employees as well. This is not how a CEO of a video game company should behave. This is, however, not very surprising. You see, this is what Western people do. They earn money and then become evil. With everything that has been going on in the company in the last few months, it's very clear that Blizzard's days are numbered, and they will inevitably have to shut down their biggest game, World of Warcraft.
With this recent news, it's very easy to see that it is an evil company that makes hateful games about hating women. I myself is a huge supporter of women, and I even made a top 5 best video game females video. So don't worry, females, I'm on your side. Anyway, I have an important message for those of you who are still playing World of Warcraft. Now that you know that World of Warcraft was made by women haters for women haters, you should stop playing it. You're not a female hater, are you? Once you've done that, you should go ahead and join the Final Fantasy XIV community.
Final Fantasy XIV is an MMOJRPG created by the best video game company in the world, Square Enix. Square Enix is a company that actually cares about making good games and cares about their fans, and they don't hate females. The biggest reason why Final Fantasy XIV is so amazing is because of the team behind it and the intense and astonishing passion from its director, Yoshida Yoshi P. Naoki.
So, come, join us. It's a very welcoming and caring community, and you will be in good hands. I know that it can be difficult and scary to join a new community, but don't worry, Seph-sama is here for you to make it into it smoothly and comfortably. First off, those of you who are new to Final Fantasy and JRPGs, there are a few things you need to be familiar with before you jump into the game.
Final Fantasy XIV has a lot of references and nods to the previous games in the series. Now first I would like to say that you should play Final Fantasy VII, as it's not only the best game in the series, but also the best game ever made. But a lot of references in Final Fantasy XIV are from the early games in the franchise, such as Final Fantasy V and Final Fantasy III. So you should really play all of the mainline Final Fantasy games, including Final Fantasy XV and the Final Fantasy VII Remake.
This way you won't be missing out on any of the references.
But don't play the old Final Fantasy games that were on the Nintendo and Super Nintendo. Those versions are old and bad. So let me tell you which versions of Final Fantasy you should play. Final Fantasy Origins for the PlayStation 1 is a great start, as you will be able to play Final Fantasy 1 and 2 on the same disc. You could also play the PSP versions of Final Fantasy 1 and 2, as they have even more content than the PlayStation 1. Final Fantasy 3 has a 3D remake available for the PSP that is super sugoi. There is also a version of Final Fantasy 4 on the PSP that is the best version of that game to date. As for Final Fantasy V, you should play the PlayStation 1, and that same goes for Final Fantasy VI, as it has really cool cinematics. You could also get the pixel remasters of Final Fantasy 1 through 6. All versions of Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, and Final Fantasy IX are great, so pick the one that is most available for you. Final Fantasy X and X-2 HD Remaster is the version to go for Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy X-2. Final Fantasy XI is not required, since it is also an MMOJRPG, but it's a great and 𝓓𝓪𝓲𝓵𝓲𝓷𝓰𝓼 game, and you should play that one as well. Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age is the best version of Final Fantasy XII, so play that one. If you don't have a PlayStation 3, then go and grab one, so that you can play Final Fantasy XIII, Final Fantasy XIII-2, and Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII. And lastly, we have Final Fantasy XV with all its DLC for the PlayStation 4.
And there you have it. Those are all the Final Fantasy games you need to play. But it might be hard to play Final Fantasy games if you are not familiar with the JRPG genre. So before you play any of the Final Fantasy games, you should play something that is a little bit more beginner friendly. Chrono Trigger.
But of course you should not play the old and dusty Super Nintendo version, but instead play the version that was released alongside Final Fantasy IV on the Final Fantasy Chronicles disc for the PlayStation 1. This one is actually really cheap, and it's well worth the money, as this version of Chrono Trigger has some really cool anime cutscenes. Chrono Trigger is a true JRPG classic that is loved by everyone, and for good reasons. It was created by what most people refer to as the Dream Team, composed by 3 legendary creators that I'm sure you have at least heard of. Yuji Horii, the creator of Dragon Quest, Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy, and last but definitely not least, Akira Toriyama, the creator of Dragon Ball, which you might have already figured out when you saw footage from Chrono Trigger, since the game has a very similar art style to that of Dragon Ball. Akira Toriyama is no stranger to game development, since he also worked on the Dragon Quest series together with Yuji Horii in the past to make character designs and more. But he is arguably more famous for being a master mangaka, and has created both Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball, as well as some other smaller projects.
I'm sure that you people watching this video are already familiar with Dragon Ball. But if you aren't,
Dragon Ball is the most iconic manga and anime ever made, and plays a very important role in Japanese pop culture. It influenced so many mangas in the 80s and 90s, and even today you can see the remnants of it in current popular shows such as Boku no Hero Academia and Kimetsu no Yaiba. It stars one of the shonen's most popular main leads, Son Goku, as you get to follow him through his life from when he was a child up until now, where he is a grandfather. The story of Dragon Ball starts off as an adventure comedy with a lot of focusing on gags and jokes, to then turn into an action drama by the 9th story arc, the Saiyajin arc, with a more serious tone.
Wow, doesn't that sound great? Dragon Ball will always be regarded as one of the most important and iconic franchises ever made. Both the manga and the anime is great, so pick the one medium you're the most comfortable with. But I will say, if you want Akira Toriyama's raw interpretation of the Dragon Ball story, then the manga is the way to go.
While the later parts of Dragon Ball have a more steady focus on fights using special powers like the Bokoyutsu technique, which is the power of flight to take the battles to the skies, as well as ki-powered attacks like the famous Kamehameha, Garikuho, or the Genki Dama, the beginning parts of Dragon Ball borrowed heavily from real-world martial arts, which not only made for very exciting and dramatic moments, but was a good way to capture the attention of the audience in Japan, since martial arts are very much integrated into Japanese culture. Martial arts, also known as Budo, which translates to something like the martial way, can be dated back to 23 BC, which is the earliest record of a sumo match, and it has since become a huge part of Japanese culture and has inspired many to pursue a life of self-fulfillment, improvement, and personal growth.
The way of Budo is not just a way to train yourself in self-defense. The West always misinterprets Budo in this way, which is not only ignorant, but also extremely disrespectful to the Japanese.
Budo is the way of life. There is no external enemy, only an internal one, oneself, that needs to be disciplined. For those of you who have trained martial arts like judo, karate, jujutsu, aikido, or ninjutsu, this should at least sound familiar.
But I'm sure that most of you watching haven't had this experience, since you are all Westerners.
Budo is not only healthy for you physically, but also mentally. It will build up your spiritual mental defense that will help keep negative forces away. But most importantly, it will get you closer to understanding Japanese culture and media.
So then is the question, which martial art should you practice? Well, there's quite a few to choose from.
My advice is to either go for karate or judo, but jujutsu is also very viable. The biggest problem is that when it comes to practicing martial arts in the West, you will most likely be told to do things that goes against the principles of Budo if you decide to sign up at a local dojo. So you need to make sure your sensei is actually Japanese and that they know what they're talking about before you start.
But 9 out of 10 times you will encounter a random Westerner who pretends to be a sensei. And watch out for those people.
So your best bet it will be to practice the martial art of your choice in the country it originated from. That's right, Japan. This way you are guaranteed to be taught proper martial arts that will undoubtedly improve your connection with Japan and its culture. Okinawa would be the place to train, since that is the birthplace of karate and most Japanese martial arts. But anywhere in the country is also good and will most definitely be enough.
And while you're at it, there are a couple of other things you need to do.
Japan is famous for its amazing and superior food culture. There are a lot of foods that not only taste good, but are also healthy for you. When it comes to Japanese cuisine, you have most likely had something like a bowl of ramen or sushi before, but they taste even better in Japan, and there are even more sugoi dishes that aren't available or popular in the West.
But before that, you need to learn how to use chopsticks beforehand. You don't want to embarrass yourself and make Westerners look stupid. The Japanese already understandably have a bad view of Westerners, so don't make it any worse.
Anyway, I would suggest that you find a place that specializes in a dish called tsukemen. It's kind of like ramen, but the broth, meat, and the noodles are separated from each other, and the broth is made thicker. You then dip the noodles into the broth before eating it.
A lot of Westerners miss out on this one, which is a shame, because let me tell you, tsukemen is extremely oishii.
Another thing you need to do is to travel to Kamakura as soon as you have the chance. It's famous for its huge Buddha statue that is entirely made of bronze, and it will give you a lot of insight and a deeper understanding of Japanese culture. Make sure to also take a picture of it to prove that you've been there.
And with that, you can go ahead and play Final Fantasy XIV. Arigato for watching this video, my new swordlings. And make sure to send this video to World of Warcraft players who haven't stopped playing the game yet. This way they will be able to take action before it's too late. And make sure to like the video and subscribe. And be sure to also click the bell to be notified when new videos are coming out. Which you definitely want to do, because the next video will be a big one. And it's coming out soon. Have a good night, evening, morning, or day. Sayonara.